Hello there. Welcome to today's session of Every Mark Matters with Mr. Mac. What we are looking at today is we're having a look at Edexcel History Paper 2, the American West. And as always, what we're going to do is we're going to break apart the components of each question. Our question of the day is explain one consequence of the winter of 1885 to 1887 for the cattle industry. So let's break this question up. Let's begin to work out what it's asking us to look at and how to answer it, and more importantly, how to get full marks for this one. So our command phrase is explain one consequence. That is how did X lead to Y? So how did your consequence, or how did the winter of 1885 to 1887 lead to your consequence? Our focus of this question is the winter of 1885 to 87. So that is some precise knowledge that the examiners have included there. So why don't you now press pause to consider what do we already know about that particular topic. If you need to have a little look at some textbooks or some online resources, feel free to do so. But press pause and annotate the term focus with what you know about that winter and the cattle industry. Have a go. Okay, right. So let's begin with what actually is the winter of 85 to 87? Well, that is the Great Die-Up. And I think this question's really mean to us because the Great Die-Up, that actually took place between 86 to 87. So I'm presuming that they're referring to the autumn, like the beginning of the winter would be my guess. All right. But it's basically asking us about the Great Die-Up. And again, the Great Die-Up, remember, that is where 15% of cattle die. And because it's that awful winter. The reason why they die is because of open range ranching. Created by John Iliffe. Again, open range ranching, that's where you've got thousands of cattle out on the Great Plains just free roaming. However, because of this winter, or as a result of the open range ranching, this winter leads to 15% of them dying, because of the horrible weather conditions. Thinking about who does well, well, who does really well as small ranchers? They can look after smaller herds. They can put the cattle inside to keep them warm and so on. The probably better quality beef after you've got the role of the cowboy changes. Why does it change? Well, basically they end up working for the small ranchers after it. What other thinking about consequences, or what other knowledge refers to about consequences? Well, the price of beef actually significantly increases. And the reason why is because there's a reduction of the quantity of cows. So when you have a huge amount of a product, the price is really, really low. But when you have a limited quantity of that, the price of a product, the price of that product goes up really high. Okay, so let's think about now the final element of our question, and that is our second order concepts. In this particular context, it is consequence. Okay, right, so again, let's have a bit of a think about here. So we have 5 consequences where we have conflict, Cattle industry. Crime. Increased settlement. And indigenous peoples. Okay, so you probably already worked it out. But just spend a moment now just working out and matching up the consequence to this question. Okay, right. Let's have a look at this together then. So is it indigenous people's way of life? Absolutely not. Is it increased settlement? Absolutely not. Is it crime? Not necessarily. You might have mentioned in there cattle rustling, or you might have thought of cattle rustling. If you'd have mentioned that, then you possibly might have picked up marks, but we're going for 4 out of 4 here. That's not necessarily the most important way to get 4 out of 4 here. All right. Is it cattle industry? Oh, absolutely. I bet you're all screaming it out to me. Absolutely. Is it conflict? Yeah, you could include conflict as well. You could include the Johnson County War. Because they've got that uneasy relationship now, the cattle barons. After the great die-up, they're very nervous, and then, as we know, the small ranchers do very well. All right? But let's just begin to think about how to get full marks for this question. Well, because it's a 4-mark question, what you need to do is you need to spend 5 minutes doing 1 paragraph. You are going to need to make sure that you do the following to get those 4 marks. So I'm going to create my success criteria here. And because these questions are so easy to do, it is a simple tick box exercise. You've got to state / match the consequence. You need to give 2 pieces of evidence. 2 pieces, 2 precise facts. You need to say how, and you need to say why. And again, just like other questions or other consequence questions, you need sneaky why in just here. Now, there is something really, really, really important about this particular question, because if you have sat there and thought that the cattle industry is an obvious consequence for this, then yes, you're absolutely spot on. But you need to make sure you're working on your explanation here, because obviously, if you were to say one consequence, I'm going to write out this sentence. One consequence of the Great Die-Up. You know, that's AO1 there, by the way. For the cattle industry was the cattle industry. Your answer simply does not make sense. One consequence of a great die-up for the cattle industry was the cattle industry it's not at all applicable, right? So you need to make sure that you are saying about how the great die-up affected the cattle industry. All right. So how do you do that? Well, you think about the price of beef. You think about small ranchers. You can think about, I've missed it out, but the closure of open ranches. So really what you need to think about is changes. What changes came as a result of the great die-up for the cattle industry? It's a really tricky question that loads of candidates this year, if this question comes up, would say one consequence of the great die-up for the cattle industry was the cattle industry. All right? So put a 5-minute time on your phone. Be really conscious of that mistake. And press pause on the video, and I will see you shortly as we have a look at both your answer and my answer. 5 minutes, and I'll see you shortly. Okay, welcome back. I'm hoping there that you've spent 5 minutes explaining one consequence of the winter of 1885 to 1887 for the cattle industry. Right, let's have a quick look then at my answer. And like we have previously done before, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out my answer, and as I'm going through it, I'm going to mark my own answer and consider our success criteria that we've mentioned here. Okay, so let's have a quick go then today. So one consequence of the Great Dive of 1886 to 87 was a devastating impact on the cattle industry. Right, okay, interesting. So, just like a moment ago, where I've just mentioned that you can't do this, you can't say cattle industry was cattle industry, and now I've just added in a little phrase here to say how it affected the cattle industry. Okay, let's continue. This was because of the deaths of 15% of the herds on the open range. Right, so there is 1 mark. Now it's possible I could pick up a mark just for stating that consequence, but I think I'm going to be really harsh to myself today because this will be a tricky question that people get caught up on. I know from my own knowledge that ranchers moved from having thousands of cattle on the open range to smaller ranchers. Is that one out? To smaller ranches, fenced into ranches, fenced into ranches. Oh yeah, that is actually supposed to be there. Right, so there is my first fact. Oh, I was struggling with this one, you could tell, which made it easier to manage and take greater care of the cattle. Right, okay, so there's my second fact, evidence. All right, so there is certainly, because I've got 2 facts, I've at least got 2 marks. All right, let's continue to have a look at my final part. This had a devastating impact on the income of the cattle barons, as their profits would be significantly reduced as they were now selling less beef. And there is my how. So you could probably see so there's my third mark. You could probably see my structure here. All right, so I've made my points where I've matched up the correct consequence. I've explained why there was a devastating impact on the cattle industry. So here is my why. I've brought in 2 bits of evidence and I've explained how. All right. Now, it's possible that a prickly examiner, someone who wakes up with in a grumpy mood, they might simply just put that as 3 marks. The reason why they might do that is they might acknowledge this point, this sentence here, my why, to be the same as me matching up the cattle my consequence. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give myself 3 out of 4. All right. The reason why is I'm just trying to assure myself here. However, with that in mind, I think it's very possible that you could get 4 out of 4. The reason why it could get 4 out of 4 is because it matches the consequence. It's got 2 facts in it. Probably need to be a bit more precise, but I have got 15% of cattle industry dying, so there is at least 1 precise fact in there. It's got a how and it's got a why, meaning it could be 4 out of 4. I think a prickly examiner would be really conscious about this sentence here, but you've got to would be really conscious about the phrasing of devastating impact in hindsight. But take the time now to have a little look at your success criteria and self-assess what you have done. Obviously, just to clarify, if you've done this, you've got no marks. I think maybe me putting devastating impact might pick me up my 4th mark. But again, my prickly examiner that I'm scared of might disagree with me. So I've stated the consequence. Have you got 2 precise facts? Have you got a how? Have you got a why? If you have, you've got full 4 marks for that question. And thank you very much. And I'll see you next time. Bye bye.